Mobile is on track to become the largest player in the digital ecosystem, and it's predicted to represent 70% of all media spending by 2018. A multi-device world gives consumers more touchpoints than ever before and offers marketers increasing opportunities to reach audiences as they research, browse, and purchase online. But the path to purchase is no longer linear, and instead mirrors a flight map as consumers move between devices and screens.
Ten years ago, there was no problem because most users were only using a single digitally connected device. Now we have tablets and smartphones and wearables and TVs all on top of the computers that we use every day. And for a marketer, that makes understanding the user's behavior very difficult.
So mobile provides this sort of dimensional view of a consumer and the ability to connect with them multiple times throughout their day. Whether it be television, whether it be display, whether it be visitation to a physical store, mobile provides this unifying mechanism for attribution. For marketers, that's an incredibly powerful new platform.
The biggest challenge that marketers face when it comes to this multi-screen journey is understanding and anticipating where the user is in their day and showing them the right message at the right time. In a study we recently did, 71% of consumers said they had a negative reaction if they got an inconsistent message across devices. And so marketers really need to focus on finding that user, understanding them across all of their devices, and making that message consistent.
You have to take into account the different devices people are using, or you'll have an incomplete picture. Users are seeing a stream of media. And to really understand performance, you have to determine how to fractionally allocate credit accurately across that stream of media.
So think about the ability to run a mobile campaign, target 8 million devices, each one in a contextually relevant, really meaningful way, and then be able to measure the effectiveness of that campaign, of that messaging, to drive those consumers to a particular store. If you understand mobile, you can now understand the consumer and their interactions across these different touch points.
If you're a marketer that's buying a lot of mobile activity, more than likely that conversion's not happening on the mobile device. So you're driving great influence in the purchase process, but the conversion's happening somewhere else. If you're using a last touch, last click model, and you're not taking into account cross-device influences, you're never going to be able to do mobile marketing well. If you're really looking at mobile as a channel that you want to use, you need to have a measurement platform that works with your media efforts to ensure that you understand the real credit that mobile's getting.
Let me introduce you all. For those of you that don't know, my name is James Green. I'm CEO of Magnetic. And with us today, we have our 4 panelists. Let's see, Vivian's coming up first. So Vivian is with TapAd, one of our partners. We're integrated with TapAd, providing a cross-device solution for us, providing cross-device data for us. Next to Vivian, we have Paul, who was once with Odometry and then sold out to Google, and so he's actually buying all the drinks later on.
Drinks on me. Drinks on Google, I should say.
Yeah, and in fact, this, to Paul's credit, this whole thing was in fact a brainstorming thing between him and myself that put this whole event together 3 years ago. So if you like it or hate it, you can still blame him. Lauren, who is new to the panel, but with Facebook, and for those of you that have been before, we always like to have 2 of the big players. Google and Facebook would count as 2 of the big players. Yeah. And then 2 specialists. So Facebook, obviously, what is it? I think 70% of your revenues now from mobile, something like that, right?
Yep.
So I think that's a measure we should all strive for. I know Magnetic's revenue isn't up at that level in terms of the mix. I think it probably should be. So you guys do a great job with that. And then finally, we have Jen from PlaceIQ. So PlaceIQ, again, one of the 2 sort of specialists in the room with Vivian, really specializes in the additional things that mobile can do, such as location and some other analytics, as we'll talk about. So very excited to have you all here. I love Chicago. I love Chicago.
Too. They're great.
The format for this is interactive, by the way. So after each set of questions, with the panel, you're going to get an opportunity to ask the panel around those questions. We're going to go through a bunch of things today. So hopefully we'll cover everything that you want. We're going to start out very, very simple. And Paul, I'm going to start with you. We talk about mobile as though it's one thing. It's not really. You know, you've got tablets, you've got phones, big ones, little ones. There are phablets that are in the middle. Talk to us about what it is and the differences between those and how we should think of them as marketers, the same, differently.
Yeah, I think sometimes we try to simplify things a little bit too much. If you think about what we're defining as mobile, I mean, it's really a collection of a bunch of different devices. And the thing that's really unique about that is these devices are used in such different ways. I mean, how you use a mobile phone is radically different from how you use a tablet. And those would both be considered quote unquote mobile. And I think as marketers, we really need to understand how consumers are interacting with these different devices, both from a media standpoint, how they ingest media and how that affects what they do, and then also how they react or respond to that media. Because some of these devices are harder to convert on, and other devices are easier to convert on. And that doesn't mean the media impact isn't there. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think and it's only gotten more complex, actually, more splintered, over the last couple of years.
Without leaping into the measurement side, which we're going to get to later, have you got any anecdotes about what is working or isn't working? Things that work on one but don't work on another, tablets versus...
And this is just my perspective. Like, I actually think the ad experience on a phone is really good. There's not any clutter. It's usually the only ad you see. I mean, we all came from a world in the PC where you have 15 ad units on a page. I mean, it's just nonsensical, right? So I actually think that's really good, but the phone is not necessarily a great conversion device. I mean, if I see it in an ad for auto insurance, I'm not going to typically fill out an auto insurance form on my phone. Now, a tablet's a different story. I mean, actually, that is a great response vehicle because typically people are using it in their home, and so that's actually a little bit different. But I think it's a lot of just I think some aspects of mobile, and the phone in particular, are really getting short shrift in the media mix because we can't track conversions effectively, but I think the impact that they're having on conversions and on the purchase cycle is much greater than they're giving credit for.
Right. So the other dimension, other than the physical device, is what the media opportunity is in that physical device, the difference between the mobile web and applications. The one person on this panel who actually has an application is Facebook. So talk to us about the difference between those and how we should think about them differently and how that should affect us.
Sure. Well, I think it's important first to distinguish the difference between mobile web and the difference between an actual app. So just to break it down simply, mobile web is really an extension of a website on a mobile device, right? Essentially, the benefit to that is any individual can access your mobile website on any device, and it's a very similar look and feel. The assets are the same, the equity and the brand is the same. For a mobile app, it's something that has to be downloaded on the device from an app store, typically. And the benefit to that from a marketer standpoint is you sort of have a little corner on an individual's device, right? And inside of that, it also gives you more control. Because of that, whether the app is active or inactive, you can collect data. You can also connect to the consumer in a different way, right? You can send them a push notification based on geography or based on behavior of theirs. So the mobile app actually has some more advantageous positioning for a marketer to have, and also gives them a place on what we all keep very near and dear to our hearts every single day, our mobile device. The one other thing I'll say that's beneficial for mobile apps is when you think about loyalty and payments. So loyalty, if you think about like Starbucks loyalty cards and the fact that you can actually walk into the store and make a payment with your mobile device.
Vivian, do you want to talk a little bit about the technical differences for that? Because
Yeah.
I don't think we can't see them all in the same way. Often these apps and devices look like different people to us.
Yeah, so one of the things that makes it really hard, as many of you probably know in the room, is that the application environment and the browser environment are two completely siloed environments on the phone, right? And so I see a lot of nodding heads here. So everyone knows that sort of hardware IDs are the primary way, or IDFAs or Android IDs, right, are the primary way that you can track in the in-app side of the house. And that is completely siloed away from what you see on the browser side, which are primarily cookie IDs, right? The standard is what you see on computer. And what that means is that to anybody who works with, who tries to reach a consumer across those two different environments, so when I'm playing Candy Crush on my app, right, on my phone, and then when I'm browsing using my Chrome browser, that I actually look like two totally different people, and I look like two totally different IDs, and there's no easy way of marrying those together in any technology that I have today.
So I'm going to start out with a little audience participation here. So show of hands. How many of you think of mobile as a marketing channel versus when you're running campaigns, you think of the individual first and then the channel second? So how many of you think of mobile as a channel first? No one? No one. Yeah. Because I know we sell to some people who do mobile, so you're definitely thinking of mobile as a channel.
That's not.
So we got a smattering of people. I think that's probably representative.
Reluctant, very reluctant. Almost ashamed to admit it.
Yeah. And we know that that's your some superior telling you you're supposed to do it that way, because probably the better way to do it.
Well, how many people will raise their hands for the other side?
Yeah, well, that's true.
How many people will raise their hands for cross-device strategy?
Finish the survey. So how many of you market to the individual versus the mobile? Actually, so it's actually 50-50. It's a very 50-50. Tentative start.
Yeah. I think the audience is really hesitant to participate.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you guys did not spend enough time at the bar, clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone had a question. Yeah. Let me, oh, you go.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like it's on.
I wouldn't call it I think it. But then you're not sure I can even talk.
Oh, yes, I can.
I guess I wouldn't see it as a channel in the traditional sense, but I would think of it more of a mobile experience, because people are tethered to their mobile devices that have become a kind of a mini-me of who they are. So I guess they're only going to respond to things that really are within the context of who they are.
So let's explore that question a little bit on the panel. I think it's a good thing for us to discuss. That's really what I wanted the panel to discuss next, is how should you think of them? Should you think of the individual, or should you think of the mobile channel and the mobile experience, as our audience member suggested? So specifically, and I think, Vivian, I'm going to ask you this question, what is the difference, or is there a difference between a cross-device channel, which is inherently audience-centric, right, so you're going to reach James Green on all my devices, or a mobile device strategy? What's the difference between the two, and how should we be thinking about them?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a leading question, I think, or the survey that we did, I think, because what we, I think, want you to take away is that mobile is a place where you reach a consumer, but you should be thinking about it as a consumer, right? You shouldn't be saying, okay, well, I'm going to buy a bunch of media on their computer, when they're on their computer, when they're on their mobile and tablet, and hope that I've hit the same person across those, because many people think they have a cross-device or cross-screen strategy when they've just tacked on some mobile onto the plan, right? Like I checked that box and I bought some mobile, and therefore I'm cross-screen. But really, the way to be most effective is to think about the consumer themselves, right? And to the point you were making around mobile experience, really think about what that consumer is doing when they're using their mobile device. It's an extension of them, right? And they're doing something very particular when they're using that device. And so you want to be reaching them at the right time with the right message on the right, like that right format and on the right screen, right? And so you can't be thinking about mobile as just, okay, well, if I buy this, this is my strategy, right? And you have to really be thinking about the consumer.
Yeah, and I think kind of a problem in the industry today really is that we fail to take off the marketing hat when we think about mobile and media specifically. And we do talk about channel strategies and planning for channels and tactics by channel, but that's not actually how a real person thinks about these devices or thinks about these screens. They don't think, oh, look, I got a sequential messaging from this brand here that I like, and now it resonates better with me. That's not how you experience media or advertising, and it's one of those things that I think we have to do a really good job of reminding ourselves and reminding our clients of on a pretty regular basis.
I'll just add one thing here. We're talking about channel and we're talking about individuals. But as a marketer, our goal is to accomplish an objective, right? We're either looking to drive brand, purchase intent, brand awareness, or or maybe we're looking to drive conversion, right? A direct response objective. And so I think the other thing we have to think about is where does mobile fit into the overall strategy of reaching our objective? People are a portion of that. Platform is a portion of that, excuse me. But overall is that even within our own minds, we have to think more holistically outside of just channel and individual.
Yeah. So I want to drill down a little bit on the cross-device thing, because I think, again, I think we would all sit here and tell you that the right thing to do is to think about the individual, not the channel. There's been mobile marketing on a channel around for quite a long time. But being able to reach across all those devices is newer, and still getting better at it. So Vivian and Paul, you guys, Google versus TapAd. How should we get that data? So how do we get that data? What does it look like? And how can these people out here take a campaign that works? They've got a campaign that should work across all media types, but you want to make sure that you're giving those messages in the right way in the right time. I know Google, you're going to say, well, just buy from Google. You could do that.
Actually, I don't really care where you buy it.
Just use odometry to track it.
Yeah, that's right. Just track it via odometry. That's all I really care
Right,
about.
and TapAd is going to say, well, use my data to identify the devices, but you use different methodologies. So why don't you talk about your methodology first, Paul, and then TapAd, you talk about yours.
I guess I'll start by we really haven't touched on just what it means to have a cross-device map. So
yeah,
just the concept is, before we had all these different devices, cookie was a decent way of being a proxy to identify a visitor. We were all on a computer, and if anything, and this isn't that long ago, people were looking at it as, well, multiple people are using the same computer, and so you actually have multiple users on a device. Now, people have multiple devices, and every device, even your PC, is really kind of your PC. And so there's a real individual connection to each of our devices. And so the goal to do better tracking is to have a better proxy that protects the user's privacy, but allows you to understand kind of how they're consuming media. And because users are now doing that across devices, you have to have some way of stitching those devices together, creating what I would call a device, or we all call a device graph. Like, what's the graph of my tablet ID, my phone ID, my cookie on my laptop? How do you tie all that data together under a unique individual or person ID to be able to track that response? So that's the concept, and it's, I think, very powerful for analytics and reporting, and also for targeting and buying media, because now you can target media and send media out so you reach a user on a consistent basis as they're consuming media across their devices. And from a reporting standpoint, you can measure that effectively. So that's why it's important. Now, great, it's important. Now there's different ways of doing that. There's what's called probabilistic, which is more of an approach that TapAd uses, and there's deterministic approach, which is more of the way that Facebook and Google do it. So, and there's really very few folks that can do what's called deterministic, because you have to have scale, which obviously Facebook and Google have. Twitter a little bit, but frankly, Twitter doesn't have the scale. No, it doesn't. Okay, well, you can be the Twitter basher since they're not here.
Google and Facebook say Twitter doesn't have scale.
You guys tell me, does Twitter have scale?
Okay.
Aha!
There you go.
The people have spoken.
Yeah, I think that Twitter gives different benefits, frankly.
Yeah.
There's a depth.
But define deterministic for us.
Yeah, so let me define what that means, because I'm talking about a term that no one means. So, when you're using Google services and when you're using Facebook, you're logging in across your different devices. So at Google, as you use Gmail across your different devices, or Chrome, or you're logged into Google+, we now have that data. We know what your different IDs are, because your username and password has been logged in across those different devices. So we can build a very accurate device graph. So that only works when you have scale, which again Google and Facebook have, and that allows us to have a pretty good percentage of the internet using population and be able to tie that device graph together. That's what deterministic is. Now, we worked actually with TapAd. We looked, before we were acquired, we looked at everyone in the space, all the third-party providers, thought TapAd was the best that we saw. But the opportunity after we were acquired to move to a deterministic data, which we felt was more accurate, and obviously was our own data, was more valuable. So I think that's the value of deterministic, is it's real logged in data. The negatives are you may miss devices, because I as a user may not log in on my Gmail on all my devices. So that's the error side of deterministic. But the positive side is, probabilistic, which Vivian will talk about, tends to have more of what they call false positives, which tend to make connections that aren't really there. So there's pluses and minuses to each approach.
Vivian, You want to talk about how you do your magic?
Yeah, so talk a bit about probabilistic, and then we can kind of get into it. So probabilistic is basically taking data points where they're not necessarily logged in data points where you say, okay, well, this is Vivian@tapad.com, and I've now gotten past a password wall. It's taking things like you're browsing on certain sites, or you've landed on, you've read certain content, you're playing a certain game on on your phone, right? So these are various data points that you can use in order to sort of bring together and create this device map, and you infer relationships between devices. So very similar to sort of your social graph, where there are edges between people, right? And those are friendships, as you kind of draw out, like I'm friends with Paul, and Paul's friends with Lauren, right? And so there's a true graph there. And instead, the device graph is you take IDs as those nodes themselves, and then you basically build out the likelihood that you think those two devices are associated with one another. That's what a device graph basically is, right? This device mapping that Paul's referring to. On the probabilistic side, what we're doing, sorry, is there a question? Yes. Yeah, it's a great question.
I'm going to just repeat it.
I can just repeat the question.
Yeah.
The question was, what degree of accuracy can we see with probabilistic data? And so what we did is a few months ago, we actually had Nielsen commission a study for us that took a look at basically their panelists, all those guys who logged in, so using deterministic data to validate the probabilistic set. And we have basically a 91% accuracy. Right? 91% of the time when we make a guess, we are correct in actually associating those two devices with the same person. And so it's a good question.
So just to repeat the question, so you're asking Tapad to opine on what their competitors' averages are.
Well, if you'd like me to guess, I'm happy to guess.
I think that probably that's not a good source of data.
I can be totally objective, completely objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the moderator, what I would say to you is they're saying 91%, and that other players will.
Nielsen is saying 91%.
Nielsen
is saying 91%.
Confirmed that it is 91%.
And so the methodology can get that accurate. And you have to ask the other vendors what their percentages are.
Well, and what I would encourage is for you to do your own tests as well, right? So we encourage people to validate these data sources with your own data set. If you have a reasonably large, doesn't have to be the size of Facebook and Google, obviously, but a few 100,000 or even 10,000 logged in sort of deterministic partners, data sets that you have, pairs that you have, that you can basically take that and compare it and just run some tests yourself. So to kind of go back to what I was saying on what probabilistic is, it's taking data points like, for instance, when I go home, all of my devices jump on the same home Wi-Fi, right? And so I have these devices, my iPhone, my iPad, my smart TV, my various computers that I have at home, my iWatch, right? All of these things jump onto that Wi-Fi. And so that's one signal, right? That's a signal that I can take into account to say, oh, maybe these devices are associated with one another. And then you can layer in other things like time-based cues, right? So I tend to be a night owl. I stay up quite late. All my devices tend to go off with me at the same time. They come on a little bit later in the next morning. So we can start taking in time-based cues, recency and frequency, to start, okay, picking apart people, right? Really starting to separate those people. And then we'll layer on one more thing, which is contextual. So we'll take a look at things like, okay, what games are you playing? What sort of websites are you browsing? And saying, okay, well, I have very distinct interests from my fiance, right? And so you can start picking apart my devices from his devices in a given household. And so you can take all these data points and use that to basically infer a device graph based on probabilistic data. And really, this probabilistic data is validated with deterministic data. So the stuff I was talking about before with Nielsen, we actually take the logged in data and validate our own algorithms on a regular basis to say, okay, can we do better on scale and accuracy based on this data set that we have that actually shows what we call the truth. Right? So that truth set can be used to basically improve the model. And then what that allows you to do is basically say, okay, well, you do have deterministic data from these various partners, but there are always going to be gaps, like we talked about, right? Not every single device are you going to log in on, particularly when it comes to the Internet of Things, right? Are you going to log in on your refrigerator tomorrow, right? Are you going to log in on your Tesla, right? There are always going to be devices out there, particularly as there's these proliferation of devices that you just can't log in on. And so you're going to want to fill in all the gaps and really touch that consumer consumer no matter where they are. And so that's where we really think that probabilistic can bring something I think like that deterministic doesn't necessarily have, but I think together is really where you're going to get the maximum scale and accuracy.
Well, there's another side to that too, which is that everyone here has two choices, but they're actually sort of a little bit of a prisoner's dilemma in that they can choose probabilistic across everything or deterministic only on Facebook or Google.
Today.
You can't use deterministic outside yet, apparently.
Today, that's
Would you like to
the only
elaborate
choice.
on that?
Is Facebook going to announce something today?
No, but I am saying, what I will say is that and Facebook and Google aren't the only deterministic players out there. So,
But the only two with scale.
sure.
Enough scale.
But Twitter
Twitter
apparently
has scale.
I was trying to
We'll go
give
with
something
3.
nice back to the audience, okay? I was throwing you a bone, okay? So that being said, I do think that both Facebook, Google, and Twitter are always going to be looking for ways to continue to evolve and be cutting edge in combining data that we know for sure and things that we can infer.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, we're able to use the Google device graph in the odometry platform to track all media performance. So you're right, if I want to now execute and buy media, you're going to have to buy media using Facebook's device graph through Facebook's walled garden. Same thing with Google. And benefit TapPad has is from a targeting standpoint, you can apply that against a broader range of media. I think from an accuracy standpoint, I think probabilistic is fine for targeting. You can deal with some aspect of waste or inaccuracy. But I think from a measurement standpoint, you just have to have a higher bar. And look, we worked with TapPad before. It was the best that we could get.
This is advertising. 91%. Pretty damn.
We did have validation. We also validated on an ongoing basis. We've had other actually social networks just like yourselves, smaller than you guys, come and actually bring in their data set and say, let's run validation against you. It's not public. But we've had other people come in and run those same tests that I was recommending that you earlier to run, right? And they've come and they've said the same thing. We see consistently 91, 92, 93% in that range of accuracy. And ultimately, I would say even the deterministic data, we find that there is a cap on that as well. It's not 100%, right? It's probably 95%. I actually think AOL put out a study on this. And it actually is deterministic data as well. When they have login data, it's about 95% because of shared devices, because people haven't logged out, right? And so it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But we think that
it's false negatives versus false positive. We're deterministic is going to miss devices. Probabilistic is going to overestimate the number.
Sure, and so I think there's a combination of strategies I think one needs to employ. And I think for maximizing scale and accuracy, having a combination of both is a good thing.
Well, not just to give a little dig to Facebook because I want to be an equal opportunity. Facebook is now seeing so many users where really mobile is becoming their primary access vehicle. The false negative aspects on Facebook could actually start to increase. So you do have to start to worry about that. I mean, there's chunks of users that really never log into Facebook on their laptop.
What? Can you quantify those chunks?
No. I don't know your data. I'm just saying there's aspects of that. I'm making a statement. I think that the use on mobile is so great that there are subset of users that really never log into their PC.
And I think that's true in international markets.
Maybe, yeah.
I would say that we see more usage on mobile because people are logging in more often throughout the day, but not necessarily because people aren't logging into desktop as well.
So the stats that I've seen in the US, which I think are actually in your public filings, are that roughly Facebook has about 50% logged in across desktop and mobile, and then I think it's about 30% mobile only and 20% desktop only are the stats that I've seen in the US. Now that's not to say that it's, I do think that there are obviously always going to be gaps. I think that's the thing that we all agree on, right? There are always going to be gaps. And that's where I think that there is this marriage between having probabilistic and deterministic data together is, to the point we were making earlier, a good thing, right? To really be able to think about it across those, right?
Yeah, but let me make one thing really clear. Facebook mobile app, we understand who individuals are, whether they ever log into desktop or not. So from a conversion standpoint, yes, sometimes it makes it challenging if they go and convert on desktop and aren't converting on a mobile device. Yes, that attribution piece is challenging, but from a targeting standpoint, we're pretty accurate.
Sure, but if you can't track if they actually convert, how do you know if it's really working?
No, you can track.
All right. Enough already. I'm going to cut you off. I got a question over here first.
So, less from cross-sites, more from just a mobile perspective, in-app, are you seeing stronger performance like Facebook in-app ads
right? So I'm just going to
try to
repeat the question for
yeah.
those of them in the back. So are you seeing, in Facebook specifically, are you seeing stronger performance in the app or on the mobile web?
I would say that we're seeing stronger performance on mobile apps because that's where more of the usage is. And I know you made a statement before that people aren't converting on mobile apps, and in fact they are converting on mobile apps at a much higher percentage because the usage there is much higher. So we're even...
What if they click out from a link that someone, like one of their friends has posted on their Facebook wall and they're served an app? Is that considered a mobile app or mobile web?
If they click out...
You're in the in-app browser, I think is what she's referring to.
So
you don't actually leave the app.
Not to get too technical, but essentially if an advertiser isn't set up to track something, it doesn't track. So it first starts with an advertiser setting up an ad and being able to track that, essentially. So we are able to capture those conversions if it's set up properly.
Yeah? You had a question. I want to go with someone new over here. Sorry.
We're going to try microphone that works. Is this microphone going to work, Becky? This one's going to work.
Really use some water.
Is this going to work? Oh.
Yay! That microphone worked. Stand up.
So
Who
I
are
think
you?
we're talking about attribution.
It would actually be great if you
Stand
guys
up.
say who you were. Just for
Sorry,
fun.
my name is Brock. I work at Starcom on the research side.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I've seen from research is that, you know, we have Facebook who does see, you know, I've seen the mobile results as well from you working with data logics. My question is, though, if we're talking about attribution, you know, if I see an ad that runs through Google's display network, and then I see a Facebook ad on the mobile news feed, you know, if I'm doing a data logic study, I'm only going to get credit for the Facebook exposure, maybe not for the Google exposure. Or if I'm doing, you know, something through Nielsen Catalina, you know, I might be able to get something through Google, but I'm not getting it through Facebook. So my question is, like, when is everyone going to start working together and create a common currency so we can actually measure something together? Because it's pretty frustrating when I have three research studies.
So it's a great question. You know.
Honestly, we hear that all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like that is something that we hear from brands and agencies all the time, because today, as we were talking about earlier, you're siloed into these walls, right? And you can't actually see who that Facebook or Google user is. And ultimately what we think, and what we've heard at least, is that people want to be able to see that same consumer no matter where they are, right? And to be able to have an open platform that allows you to see that. And so ultimately, I'm going to answer this question from the Tapad perspective of we want to power any technology that you want to use. Right? Any technology that you care to use, whatever attribution system you want to use, whatever ad server you want to use, whatever DSP, DMP, you name, the whole Lumascape that you want to use, we want to help you cross-device enable those, because we see cross-device as a layer, as like an identity layer that sits around all of your technology, rather than I'm going to force you, if you're going to look at Facebook and look at Google and look at all these various IDs, you have to buy within our systems, right? You might be able to track across the systems, but you have to buy within
we're tracking.
So,
we're doing that now.
Yeah.
So that's what our attribution solution does. We leverage the device graph. We can track Facebook paid media. Our tag's certified on Facebook, so we can track all that media.
There are limitations to that.
Right, we're not going to get as granular because you have limitations on what you allow, but we can track any paid media.
But I do think it's
and
important.
we have our device graph, and we can track all of your other media channels, and we can allocate that credit. So we are doing what you talked about.
So
it doesn't mean there's not a challenge within each individual platform, but...
So no surprise that Paul, who sells an attribution solution, says he can track it all. But I'd love to, I want to just refocus the question a little bit for you, and then you can answer.
Sure.
Which is, I've heard several times in the market that Facebook is going to start enabling their data to be used outside their ecosystem. Is that strategy going to continue to be a Facebook-centric one where you got to buy through Facebook and you got to see everything measured through Facebook, or is it going to be one which is more open, where to your point, the data can be used outside the ecosystem? Seems to me that both Google and Facebook, no matter what Paul said, are going for the closed solution, which is a shame for us, but I think that's reality.
I will say
right?
a couple things. First and foremost, it's an area I have to tread lightly.
Yeah.
Just
fair.
For the sake of my job. So I'll tread lightly in answering your question.
You could try getting her drunk later.
Good luck. One of my first friends from college is conveniently in the audience today, so she can probably tell you a little about that. But anyways, So the interesting thing about this attribution piece is I'm sure a number of you who work with Facebook know all about custom audiences and the power of custom audiences in driving your business objectives. It is the most powerful solution we've seen across the board, and we hear it every single day. That being said, is all of these third-party attribution partners are not able to attach themselves to those really powerful tools. And there's a couple of reasons why. One is a data-specific reason why, and the other is that, for us, that data is proprietary. And the moment that we allow other partners to attach view tags and follow people around and reverse engineer algorithms, we become less competitive. And as a business, it doesn't really work. Yeah. So we will have solutions coming out in the next 6 months or so, which will help open up the ability to see the ecosystem beyond just Facebook. And I'll be happy to give you my card and call you as soon as it's ready.
All right. Let's sort of talk about this attribution thing a little bit more, and then move on to the other things that mobile can do. One of the things that Vivian and I were talking about, I actually wrote an article, and Vivian told me that it was not so good. She was pretty blunt in her feedback. It only got published yesterday, so we were sitting in the lobby talking about it. And my claim, which you disputed, which I'd like you to dispute for everyone, was that if you are have a cross-device strategy, it doesn't matter whether it's in a siloed environment with Facebook or Google, or whether it is using cross-device data from Tapad. If you don't have attribution on the back end that is also cross-device, don't do it. Because the click that is driven on the mobile device because you saw data on the desktop will not count when you convert on the desktop, right? So you delivered the ad because you knew that it was the same user, but then the conversion happened on another device. And so my advice in the article was, if you don't have cross-device attribution then you shouldn't do cross-device targeting. And you said that's a stupid idea, James.
Not so harshly, but so my point is, look, the perfect solution is obviously to have cross-device attribution, cross-device targeting, have everything together, right? Because that's where you're going to really see the view of the consumer. Now, there's a difference between what the ideal is and what the reality today is, right? And so ultimately, we were talking about what do we want you guys to take away ultimately from this panel tomorrow morning, right? Not just like at a high level, there's really interesting, like, oh yeah, you should be thinking about it as a consumer. What is it that you can actually do tomorrow? And if tomorrow you do not have cross-device attribution, that shouldn't stop you from doing cross-device, period. Right? You should be taking, for instance, cross-device targeting can allow you to take data from online and move it into mobile. And you can still track single platform conversions, right? So for instance, you can still look at what the click-through rate for a given mobile device, for mobile ad was. You can still look at whether or not this particular targeting strategy, so for instance, let's say you have an online pool that you're doing remarketing to, right? You have that online pool, you move it into mobile. And so now those are the same people who visited your website on their mobile devices now. And so you target them with an ad. So the question is, do those guys do better at converting than just a standard prospecting campaign, right? So you have a standard mobile prospecting campaign where you're trying to get somebody to do something on mobile. Can you get that particular tactic to work better than the standard prospecting campaign? And what we've seen is yes. Right? You can actually take an online audience, move it into mobile, and that actually works nearly as well as a standard remarketing pool from mobile. Right? So that means that you can actually get a ton of mobile conversions by just taking data that you have from online and moving it into mobile, even if you don't have cross-device attribution. Right? So another good example of this is online to online. So there are probably multiple browsers that you use. Right? And the example I cited to James earlier today was when I click out of something out of my Outlook, what happens is it takes me to IE because Microsoft always wants me to use IE. And I don't think anybody here uses IE anymore if I had to guess. And so it takes me there, but then I ultimately convert because I never use IE. I ultimately convert on my Chrome browser. And so what you can do is you can actually deliver an ad instead to the Chrome browser and get that person to convert on the standard browser that they're used to working on, they're used to researching and doing everything on. And so again, it doesn't have to be a cross-device attribution and tracking tied to that that targeting, but you can still take a look at like overall improvements in single platform conversion rates using cross-device data. Now, obviously, not perfect, right? I'm not going to say that you should like stick with that, but if you have something to do tomorrow, right, and you're like, I don't have a cross-device attribution system, you can still do at least that.
Questions before we move on to the next topic? Yes, in the back there.
Online to mobile. Do I really need that? Okay, so moving the data pool from online to mobile, obviously online in flash banners and all the rich media executions and yada, yada, yada. I think I'm taking a little bit of a parallel discussion here. What kind of tips or best practices do you have taking your banner that could be this expansive, push down unit and shrinking it down to a 320 by 50? Do you have any tips, any best practices that actually help to improve those conversion rates that you're seeing if we're doing all this work across platforms? Like, how do we best hit them with like the creative messaging in the mobile sphere?
Yeah.
Best creative strategy.
Or I can get started, or if you want to go ahead.
I can actually take that. I think that mobile doesn't always get its due, right? For a lot of reasons. One is that the standard measurement is a market mix model, which is very insensitive to what mobile does. The other is I think a lot of people get hung up on the size of the real estate on a smartphone and what you can do creatively there. And I think that when creative agencies think about telling a story, they love sight, sound, and motion, and they love the idea of video, right? And that can be really hard to do in that small banner. But the way around that, and what we've found to be really effective, is making sure that the message itself is most relevant to that person. So it goes back to that whole idea of the audience, of the right person, the right individual, receiving the message that's most relevant to them based on real world triggers. So it can be where they are at that time, but it can be about something they did the other day. It could be something related to what they bought in the store last week. I think really in mobile, it's about increasing the relevance of that message to make that creative and maximize that smaller real estate to the max.
So what do you do? So that's dynamic creative. What do you do if you're a buying agency and you don't have the ability to change the creative? Then what do you do?
You definitely don't shrink it. So I would definitely not take a 728 by 90 and try to put it into a 300 by 50 spot. That definitely doesn't work. But I would agree with you. It's like you have to work with some sort of creative agency to strip down the amount of text, really think about that person, where they are in the funnel, what is it that you actually want them to be doing, right? Do you want them to convert right there? If you do, you have to have a call to action. You have to have them that give them a reason to click on it. Or if it's not a call to action right there, then you have to think about, well, what's the next device that they're going to ultimately, right? And what are they actually going to be doing after that? And really thinking about this funnel that's not entirely downwards anymore. It's kind of this like mess of a sort of circle where you kind of do research on all types of devices, but really think about what like the call to action ultimately is.
Yep.
Hi. So we work for a very large appliance brand, and I guess what I'm more wondering is we're starting to think about mobile as kind of what you were saying earlier about not just an extension of desktop, but how people are actually using mobile. But for a really large purchase decision, when people go in stores or when they're close to a nearby location, for the most part, they've done their research. They know what they're gonna buy. So how do you utilize that mobile space to change their opinion? Because I think that's one of the things we struggle with is, we can target people who are close to maybe a Lowe's or Home Depot and serve them with our brand's messaging, but at that point they've done their research. And even if they've done their research and we can, cross-device target, how do we change their mind in that moment?
Sorry. No, you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I actually have an example of that, and this is one of the earliest partnerships that PlaceIQ executed about 3.5 years ago now with a large retailer. And it was centered around Black Friday and conquesting to try to drive people from other stores, competitive stores, into their own stores on that specific day. So we took a look at the audience behavior, so we understood why someone might be at a Toys R Us. You're buying toys for children of this age, or you're at a Target because we think you're buying these types of products. And we would serve up the most relevant message to that person while they were in that store with an immediate, hey, guess what? There's a better price for what you're looking for at this retailer, and it's 2 blocks down the road. So I think when you think about ways that you can change perceptions in mobile, that's one of the key things to take in is to think about what goes into that purchase decision process, but to also think about what's a compelling enough offer that makes someone change their mind.
Lauren, you want to chime in on that?
You nailed it.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm going to come back to you now, Jen. I mean, so PlaceIQ is doing some interesting things around location. We've talked a little bit about attribution, but you know, phones are people meters. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with using phones as people meters.
People meters, that's a big radio throwback.
It
I
is.
believe.
It
Isn't
is.
it an Arbitron term?
It is an Arbitron
About
term.
8 years ago.
I'm an old guy. What can I tell you?
So really at PlaceIQ, where we focus the most is trying to be the best at understanding consumer behavior. We want to understand what they're doing in the real world based on all of the different places that you go. We understand where you live, we understand where you work, we understand where you shop, and where you go for fun. In addition to that, we have some really great partnerships in place to pull in data from partners like Rentrack, so we can now map TV viewership data down to the devices and understand what people are most likely to see and map that back to your actual TV schedule. We have partnerships with dunnhumby, so we understand what people are purchasing in stores, in grocery stores, in C-stores, and in pharmacies, so that we can understand what type of purchaser are they. Like, are they price sensitive? Are they someone that always buys the most expensive, the finest foods? We start to develop these unique audience personas based on all of those real-world triggers to understand people better than anyone else, and that allows you to activate those audiences across any channel that makes the most sense, whatever's most relevant for you. So what we've started to do is extend beyond just mobile media and mobile banners. We actually activate on Facebook mobile now. We're starting to activate across screen. We're starting to activate in video, and we are launching an addressable TV product soon as well. Those are all things that we're really excited about, but at the root of all of those is our audience understanding and making sure that that is better defined than anything else that you could get out there.
Okay. More questions out there before we continue to move on? No? Yes? No? Okay. You talked a little bit about the Rentrack stuff and the actually I think so. We have about 10 minutes left, so I think probably what we should cover is two things. I've asked all of the panelists to prepare case studies to cover at the end, but maybe before we do that, why don't, and I'm going to ask you, Lauren, to talk a little bit about, because I don't think we've really given you the opportunity to talk about Facebook as a mobile-first company, right? And we've talked about some of those things, so I want to give you an opportunity to do that before we go to the case studies.
Sure. I think just to sort of set the numbers straight, I'll discuss mobile consumption on Facebook. So every single day, we see just about 890 million people on Facebook every month. Every single day, we see 745 million people on Facebook. 73% of those people are accessing Facebook from a mobile device, typically on average 14 times a day. What does that mean as a marketer? You must be there, right? So what we did as a company about 2 years ago is Mark pivoted our business and said, I will not look at anything unless it's mobile first. And that's exactly how we think at Facebook. There's two things that I want to talk about. First is mobile applications, and the second is video. So Facebook as a business essentially created a whole new business for a number of players who never would have had distribution if it wasn't for the Facebook mobile app download ads. So essentially, in the past, the only way you could get massive distribution was if you were one of the top apps in the Apple or the Google Play Store. And what Facebook did is we actually provided a platform where you could target people based on who they were as individuals or based on a cost per install and drive distribution. And that's really where we saw our mobile business take off, is where the actual, from a direct response standpoint, is from the mobile app download, mobile app install ads. The second piece of that was also, so the first one is discovery, and then the other one is re-engagement, right? So like driving more value with the people who already have your ads. And those are the two things that we've really solved for, and all of the other players in the space are now following us into that. The other thing I'll talk about with Facebook mobile is video. So video consumption in the last 2 years has grown on mobile devices about 400%. Facebook's mobile video has skyrocketed, and that essentially is really where we're driving a ton of brand dollars, if you will, with video. And what we've actually found a lot of times when we talk about video, we are an autoplay video source. And what we found is that, people ask us a lot of questions is, am I paying for this view if people aren't really watching it? And actually with it being autoplay, we've actually seen much more higher consumption, higher completion rates because of the action and the attention that's captured in mobile feed. So all in all, I wholeheartedly believe, whether I was at Facebook or not, that we are the mobile solution and we are the cross-device marketing partner that you must be a part of for all of your media buys. And I would say that if I left Facebook tomorrow.
Okay, so what I want to do is have every one of these guys go through a case study where they've done something unique in mobile that is different than what you would expect. But before I do that, I'm going to give one more chance for questions because there'll be no questions after these last things, and then we'll go up and we'll go upstairs. So question over in the back, on the back left there.
This kind of expands on the lady's question about the appliances earlier.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on purchases that are just traditionally now and probably always will be 100% offline? For example, Campbell's Soup. It's not a client of mine. But if Facebook, for example, just a total really, really targets someone to buy Campbell's Soup, how are you ever going to attribute that to their Facebook advertising when they go to the grocery store and buy a can of Campbell's Soup?
Sure.
Thoughts on that?
Great question. When you think about consumer product goods, they're traditionally brand marketers. So the goal would be there that you're creating an experience with them such that when they go to the store, Campbell's Soup is essentially what they're taking off the shelf. So to answer that question more directly is I would start with what's valuable to that individual. If it's a mother, you're going to market to her very differently in why Campbell's Soup is a part of who she is and a part of her family. Then if you're a single individual who can only afford Campbell's Soup when you go to the store, and why would you pick Campbell's versus the store brand that's 30 cents cheaper, right? So I think when we talk about brand and these products that are, whether it's like brand as one spectrum, but then also even if you think as much as like an enterprise solution or a B2B solution is creating an experience for each such that when they go to make that purchase, the experience is what drives them to select your brand.
So
Yeah.
I'll jump in there really quick. We, in the last 6 months, have developed a measurement product, a sales lift product, down to the SKU level with our partners at dunnhumby. So we actually understand who has been exposed to your message. We then understand, were they more likely to visit the store, the retail location you were trying to drive them to, and we can also ultimately understand, did they purchase? And that's based on a one-to-one loyalty card to device ID match at a really massive scale. It's the only offering out there like that, and it is an end-to-end solution, and we're really excited about it because for a long time there was a gap in what we were able to offer CPG partners or people whose purchases typically took place offline, and a visit to a store, you don't really know what product they're buying. Now we know, and we can tell you with a very high level of accuracy that they actually have purchased your product.
So if you're going to weigh in on that, Paul, rather than talking about the attribution side, which, I think part of the question was how should you think about mobile? What should you do? What should the creative implementation, what should the buying strategy be for a CPG company, and why do it there versus TV or somewhere else? Why mobile?
There's a lot packed into that question. So as Jen mentioned, there are methods where you can use third-party data sources to kind of blur the lines between online and offline. So using frequent shopper data, which allows you to understand at an address level what people have bought. Well, I can take any information using someone like a LiveRamp, or LiveRamp works with these partners to convert that to a cookie pool or to device ID so you can start to stitch that together. So that's the mechanism that you tie that together. Now, your question about how do you change your strategy, I mean, to me, there's no silver bullet. I think that the most important thing is to have a measurement platform in place that allows you to understand how all your different media elements are driving a conversion, whether that conversion happens online or happens offline. And then once you have that data, you can actually see what's working and what's not working, and you can start to change your strategies. I honestly don't know off the top of my head how mobile, as part of a marketing mix, where it fits in the marketing in the sequence to drive people to convert? Is it something that should be done early in the queue, late in the queue? I think that's where you just need to look at the data and let the data tell you what makes sense. And if you have kind of better accuracy around that, then you can start to make decisions to drive those activities. It's a great question. It's really where I think they're moving on that. We are as well. That's kind of the next evolution of what we're trying to do.
Last question before we go to the case studies. Difference in B2B versus B2C in mobile. Anyone?
Yeah. So I lead our B2B business at Facebook. So I love that question, and I would definitely invite anyone after this to come speak to me about that. But essentially, B2B is, if you know B2B marketing, there's a ton of, essentially it's brand to demand. So you're either looking to drive greater increase with your current customers or essentially fill your pipeline so that you can drive greater business. Facebook has more business decision makers than any platform across all digital B2B publications. So, and they're spending more time there. So essentially what it comes down to is a lot of the same consumer principles, you're just putting your B2B hat on. And that's in its simplest form.
Anyone else? No? Then let's go to the case studies. Jen, I'm going to ask you to start, and we'll go across the panel.
Sure. So one of my favorite examples of a great case study that I think brings in the core elements of Place IQ's offering is a campaign that we executed for a luxury auto brand last year. And they had a couple of objectives in mind. Of course, they wanted to increase awareness, consideration, and try to measure purchase or dealership visits to their dealerships. But they also just wanted to get a better understanding of the competitive landscape. Who are they competing with? How frequently are people going to other dealerships? Do they need to rethink their competitive consideration set? And so we found a couple of different things. One, people who were exposed to the mobile advertising were in fact more likely to appear at the dealerships later, and we were able to prove that through place visit rate, PVR, which is a registered trademark as of today.
Congratulations.
I think my comms people wanted me to mention that. So. And in addition to that, which I think is the more interesting piece of this, is the audience analytics portion that comes after the campaign ends. Our data scientists take a look at all of the data and they pour through it and they try to get a better understanding of who these consumers are in the real world. Where else are they going? What are they doing? And for this luxury auto brand, they thought their competitive consideration set was who you would normally suppose it would be. It was Mercedes, it was Lexus, it was BMW. But what we found in the data was that people who were considering our clients' cars were actually just as frequently, if not more frequently, going to Hyundai dealerships as well. So that did two things. One, it solidified Hyundai's big marketing and repositioning push that they've been going through in the last couple of years to elevate the brand status and the quality of the cars that they produce. And two, it made our clients say, hey, we need to add them into our competitive deep dives. This is information that we didn't have before. Now we're going to actively conquest them through our media activation and go after people that are also shopping for Hyundai cars as well.
So I'm going to sort of stick on the automotive side, but I also have to give some love to Instagram because I haven't talked about Instagram at all, and we are Facebook and Instagram. So we recently worked with Mercedes to launch one of their new automobiles on Facebook and Instagram together. And on Instagram alone, what we found is that we actually drove, and I'll use the Nielsen number here, a 14-point increase in recall, and a 10-point increase in intent. And when we paired Instagram and Facebook together, so when you were delivered a brand ad on Instagram and a direct response ad on Facebook, we drove 580% more site visits than when Facebook and Instagram advertising wasn't on.
I'll use more general what we see across a lot of our clients. So when we add cross-device mapping, we typically find that and no surprise here, that the number of stages in the sequences, like we see longer sequences because we're now able to actually match that up, and we see that it tends to increase the number of conversions we're able to track 20 or 30%, and it really dramatically changes the perception of mobile. because without cross-device tracking, mobile tends to have an incredibly high cost per action, even with attribution, because we're just measuring the cross-device conversion, the conversion against just that device. When we bring cross-device mapping in, we see that mobile starts to play a more active and a better, more cost-effective impact on the overall marketing mix. So it's helping marketers really. I think marketers a lot of times launch mobile campaigns and they know in their guts that it's really working, but they can't justify it in their metrics. When we start to bring cross-device mapping into our attribution solution, we tend to show kind of the mobile influence that customers, I think, our clients really thought that it was generating. Tends to be much more cost-effective.
Excellent. And Vivian.
So I'm the last one. I'm going to go back to a point that Lauren made around, we call it actually 1 + 1 = 3, which kind of offends my math major brain. But really what she was saying is Facebook and Instagram together are driving higher conversions, right, higher lift. And we see very similar things on our side, just looking more at it from a device perspective. So when you have exposure on multiple devices, you actually have a tendency to see higher conversion rates. And so we did a campaign with a very large financial services company. And so they came to us and said, look, frankly, I don't believe that mobile works because I look at my conversion rates and they're terrible, right? Nobody signs up for a brokerage account on their phone, frankly. And so I really don't want to spend money in mobile. You have to prove to me why this is worth doing. And so what we did is we ran a true cross-device campaign. We ran media in mobile, in tablet, in computer. And we took a look at the numbers. And basically what came back is that people who are exposed to ads on multiple devices actually saw a 200% increase in conversions. Right, 200%, that's huge, right? So people who actually were interacting with your brand on both their computer and their mobile devices had a much, much higher conversion rate. And the other really interesting stat that came out of that as well, to kind of the point I think we were talking about why mobile, like why should I be using mobile if I'm targeting to Campbell's, right? Is a very interesting thing of what happened is that you take a look at the frequency that's required to drive one conversion when you look at computers, right? And that was something like 14 impressions to get one conversion effectively. When you do that across devices on computer and mobile together, that impression frequency drops to 6. 6, right? So you only need to deliver 6 impressions to that user versus the 14 that you had to deliver on that same platform. And our hypothesis for that is because we think that consumers, depending on what place they're in, did you hit them at the right time? Are they really getting the most impactful experience is really much more impactful when it's cross-device.
So I want to try to summarize what we've covered tonight just in a couple of sound bites so that you have a couple of things to take away from. We started at the beginning that all devices are not created equal, and the creative has to work on those devices. And then we heard that the industry is still fractured and it's going to stay fractured, to your question over there. I'm sorry, but you can either be holistic within one or two platforms, 3 if you include Twitter, or you can get everyone else involved using people like TapAd or PlaceIQ. And that it's really important to think of things in an audience-centric manner and not a channel-centric manner. In other words, keeping that, using cross-device and these other solutions to make sure that the message is consistent across all of those people, as opposed to trying to just have a mobile strategy. And then we heard a little bit from PlaceIQ about some of the new things you can do about measuring how, where your phone is and some of the other analytics that you can get. So great panel, thank you very much.